Good morning, everybody. My name is Greg Otto. I am the editor-in-chief of CyberScoop, and so much of that panel is what we cover on a day-to-day basis. And I love that panel because specifically with the KEV and CISA 2015, a lot of that is rooted in threat intelligence, and it leads perfectly into our next panel. Look, when it comes to all of the data that federal agencies have to deal with and process in order to protect themselves, there's a lot of noise. So threat intelligence is important, but what's really important about it is making it actionable. So I would love to welcome to the stage to talk through those actions. Please welcome Manny Medrano, Office Director, Cybersecurity Monitoring and Operations at the Department of State, and David Carroll, VP of Cyber Capability Engineering and Strategy at GDIT. Give them a round of applause, please. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And threat intelligence really is the lifeblood and the backbone of cyber operations. So we can jump right into it. Manny, from your side, how do you view the importance of public-private partnerships, especially like those that were set up in, this is a 2015 bill that the last panel was highlighting. How do you use that to build a stronger threat intelligence program inside the government?
Yeah, well, good morning. Thanks, Greg, for having us here. Right now I lead the SOC operations for State Department, and prior to that I was with the Cyber Threat Intelligence team at the U.S. Department of State, and shout out to our CTAT, our cyber threat team that is also here. So we actually started working on this private partnership and also with the public as well a while back ago. Our threat team realized quickly, right, the need for those partnerships and that real-time sharing of threat intelligence information. Of course, there's different classifications that you have to take into consideration, right? But I think we have come a long ways to kind of share some of that information. And I think how the previous panel talked about, right, and how David and I have actually worked on various other in the past, right, where is that the threat intelligence, right, needs to have an outcome, right? And it's kind of like thinking more of like a business, right? And I think for government, it's a little bit weird for us to think of like, what is the return on investment, right? But it's what we call the nuclear, right? It's terms of like, okay, who is your audience from a threat intelligence and where you're getting that and how fast can you get it and then how fast can you act on it, right? And that goes back to measuring those outcomes as well. So partnerships, I think, is a key. I think what CISA even talked about earlier and also from Commerce, right? It's important to have those open lines of communications. And then the key is take action, because we often talk a lot, but we don't take action.
So, David, with what Manny was saying there, I'm wondering from the private side, how do you balance the need for speed in getting that real-time intelligence with ensuring that the intelligence is accurate and actionable so you can take the right actions based on the intelligence that is being fed in?
Again, Greg, and the audience, thank you for having me. I'll go back and I'll start from the very beginning where Manny ended, which is you have to start with an outcome in mind. You don't go after any type of threat without understanding, what the outcome, against the target is from the adversarial aspect. So you quickly realize after that, because of the diversity of platforms and the wide variety of things that you can put out there, that you have a data problem almost immediately. And then, so what you have to do is, based on those outcomes, you have to start reducing that data. And so an example would be, you can go out and collect a lot of telemetry. You could take a household example. I've got a Jeep that I work on. I've got an EC indicator. I plug that in, and it tells me I have an oxygen sensor problem. There's a lot of data that you had to reduce to get to that EC code. And that is sort of the way that we have to kind of look at threat intelligence. We have to constantly be reducing from the edge to try to get to something that matches that outcome, something that reflects the adversarial activity. And we need to do that fast. And so the exercises that we've been going through and that I've seen, whether it was big commercial cloud or working in financial services or back in national security, the military side, it's the same problem. It starts with the data. You have to have an outcome in mind, and you have to come back from it in order to get that down to something actionable, because There's just too much data. It has too many different contextual meanings, as you heard from the last panel. And you also need to shoot at what is the, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, what is the mission that you're trying to get after? Because that also has to be reflected.
So if it was that easy to get to outcomes, we obviously wouldn't be sitting here right now, Manny. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on some of the ongoing challenges you encounter when trying to ensure that that threat intelligence is actually acted upon and the outcomes that you've all decided that you need to achieve are achievable.
Yeah, I mean, so you're right. I mean, if there was not a challenge, right, we wouldn't be sitting here and we're all listening to each other, right? But I think one key area that it's important for us to focus on, right, is, and we mentioned that in the previous panel, which is going back to the basics, and that's what David was alluded to, right? We do have a data challenge, right? I wouldn't say a problem because it's an opportunity, right? So we have a data challenge that we can make it into an opportunity, right? And at the same time, right, is also a cultural shift, mindset change that we have to work through as well. I'll give you an example right now, right? So we collect a lot of data. Shocker, right? We're global, so we collect a lot of data. And the analysts, right, were like, I want everything. Said, well, the check, it's not the same anymore, so we can only afford X, right? They're like, what do you really need to take action that is focused on the mission? They're like, well, that's a really good question. It's like, I know that's a good question. Go find out. Then, right, that's where we led to is like, okay, so from a threat perspective, right, from our cyber threat intelligence team, it's like, all right, what are the threats, right, that we are aware of that are impact our organization? Because that's very important. Not all organizations are created equal, right? So there's some similarities, but then we have to know our own infrastructure. Then from there is like, what mission sets are important to the organization. In our case, right, probably providing U.S. citizen services abroad is critical. So then the systems that support that are key to us. So then from the threat side, it's like, all right, so we know these threat actors, we know what their intent, we know what their capabilities may be, right? So then this is the data that we need to focus on that specific mission set and then bring outcome, meaning, all right, so before we get to the being basically an incident response, the other part of it is, well, how about we use also threat intelligence and the data to then be proactive and maybe patch those vulnerabilities, set configuration management changes, right? So I think that that's the area, right, where it requires sort of a mindset change, right? And I think a lot of communication and also some hardcore decisions that where leaders have to make some decisions, and there will be people who may not be happy and others who will be happy, but then you're going to have to work through all of that as well.
So David, I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that, because like Manny said, I would imagine that the mindset really is the biggest part of it, because obviously state is different from commerce, which is different from treasury, which is different from, you know, all of these other agencies, so they have their own unique problems, but in order to effectively take threat intelligence and make it actionable, it really is going to be thinking about things from a different perspective.
Absolutely. There's a command and control concept. We just had situational awareness, the situational awareness panel up here. You have to start with the critical items of interest, right? On the military side, we call those CCIRs. We call them different things in different organizations. If you're at a board level in a financial institution like I was, those are, you know, the first line of defense postulates that come from risk management. You have to kind of take those, and then you have to assign those to the different types of folks who actually pursue the threats. If you don't do that, then you get the raw intelligence or the raw analysis, and that's also essential. You should have a team doing that as well. But you should have these mission-focused teams, because you can't, again, as Manny alluded to, you can't have everything. The whole joke is, where would you put it? But you know, how can you pay for it is the bigger joke. And also the diversity. There is goodness in the different types of CTI. There is goodness in all source intelligence. But you have to actually get down to and you know, you could call them mission-based teams, business-based teams, vertical-based teams. You've got to get those intelligence analysts to understand what are they looking for? What is the outcome? And they do this in all sorts of organizations. You know, if you're at US Cyber, you've got different named operations. If you're, you know, in the financial industry, you've got different threat actors, but also you have different verticals. That, you know, commercial payments is different than moving, moving, fiduciary funding for large organizations. They just operate differently. Trading's another one. So you just have to kind of take those teams and maybe hone them in, and that doesn't mean they can't operate together. They should have a clearinghouse. And then also, like I said, you should probably have that raw team that's just kind of looking across the spectrum. But again, they don't necessarily have a mission focus. They're sort of like what I would call like the twinge on the electric fence. They're like, something's out there, we don't know what it is, and then you turn it over to the folks and say, is this relevant to you, you, or you? And then you have that team that thinks they're the biggest one, or they think they have the most cognizance on it. You have them go after it.
So there's so many levers that need to be pulled, and the one that is the wild card, obviously, in all this is the attacker, because, well, we have all of these, talking about culture and mindset. An attacker out there is like, cool, have those conversations. I have your Active Directory keys, and I'm going to cause havoc while you guys go have a meeting about it. So I'm wondering.
No meetings.
But we like meetings.
So, as attackers learn and evolve to what the agencies are doing, Manny, I'm interested if you could share, how do you change your methods or processes as the attackers, don't have the rules or don't follow the rules and are just looking to attack as quick as possible?
So really quick, right, and I think you hit the nail right now where one of my favorite topics, which, at State Department, we're so used to, I call it when I first started, we have a meeting to discuss the problem, then we have another meeting to discuss what we discussed about it, then we have another meeting to figure out what we're going to make a decision about it, and then it goes on and on, right? But I think we have gotten a lot better at this, right, where to the point where right now, right, it goes back to making some hard decisions and also leadership, right? Pushing beyond that, because you can talk all day long about threat intelligence, right? And threat intelligence, actionable, the buzzwords and all this technology, vendors as well, right? I love vendors, but I also have to be cautious about it, right? Because it's like, yeah, everybody sells a lot of things, right? But then at the end of the day, it comes back to the people and the process, and the last thing is the technology. So then, it's like, all right, so let's go back to not eating the whole elephant at once, right? You cannot boil the ocean. So then specify what areas are critical to the mission set that you're working on, and then from there specify what process and what mindset do we have to change for those specific jewels in our case, right, for the state in terms of like what is important to us. And then from there, you begin to do what we call the change management, the transition, which is the mindset change, right? I can tell you it's not easy. I am like, when I started this, and I know some of my colleagues are in the audience, when we started this, some of them were like, why are we doing this? No, we don't want to do this, right? But we have to change. And then once they start to see the outcome, the results of it, they're like, oh, that's actually not bad. This is good. But it goes back to human behavior as well. One thing that I also wanted to mention about threat intelligence when we say about making it actionable, right, is what I would like to say is we have to reimagine threat intelligence. Because I think we have been talking a lot about threat intelligence, right, the concept of threat intelligence, but it is time to reimagine this, right, in a way that fits the audience. For example, right, we have a CIO, right, who is leading state and has to make risk-based decisions, right? So she needs to know in a very clear, sometimes 2 to 3 bullet points, what's going on, what do I do about it, and what is your recommendation, right? Where sometimes from a threat intelligence perspective, right, we have to kind of like go through the whole process of analyzing and then making sure that we have the sources and we have all the information that we need before we publish any product, right? And that goes back to what the earlier panel, which is getting faster to maybe not a perfect product, but maybe somewhere closer that we can take action, but it's called a risk-based decision at the point.
So, David, elaborate on what he said. No, there was a lot there, and I feel like I could go in 8 different directions. So you might be thinking the same thing.
David,
I don't know.
We've got the mental shorthand on this
Yeah,
one. And it's most important. I've lived most of my career on the operational side or the engineering side. And outcomes are always very important because they're either monetary or they're directly operational impact. And so this mindset change is part human reinforcement, because when you grow up on, and I've worked alongside intelligence folks in the military, the intelligence community, the commercial industry, if you get them the outcomes and you reinforce that, listen, you did something good and you found this and it was this quick, all those behavioral patterns become, they're easier to combat the natural tendency, because all folks that come up on the intelligence side, they want all the data. They want it forever. They want to go back and page through it like a library. The problem is, very rarely does that actually equal the operational impact. And I've asked those questions in several organizations. When was the last time you went back? What do you need the data for? There are different reasons you need that data. So that's a cultural change to get these teams engaged. It has to be just in time. It has to be real. The last thing I'll add to that is the collaboration that the prior panel talked about. If you see me talk when I was prior at CISA or now, I talk about the absolute necessity for that, because many hands make light work. Once you get those patterns down, we have the trade craft. It's almost like a community. They'll use it, and they'll use it to kind of jumpstart off of that to get to where the mission needs it to be impactful. So all that's very important, but it is very, very much cultural and emotional to a certain extent for folks.
Yeah, if I can add to that a little bit, right? I think that's one of the areas where we have had a lot of successes at State Department with both diplomatic technology and diplomatic security with the threat team, because it was a mindset change to start to collaborate more and share information. That was a change, right? But I think our leadership was able to help that transition along. And now we're at the point where if we see something right away, our threat team immediately is already engaged with the interagency and with the private sector, and they're quickly trying to decipher, what does this mean? What is the private sector seeing? Is this something relevant to us or not, right? And we have come a long ways for that. I mean, we still have always more work to do, right? But that is one of the areas where I'm very happy to see that the threat team has gone.
So that leads into my final question, and because it's a tech event, I would be remiss if I did not mention AI.
What is AI?
It's just math.
Yeah, so how is the math then, the automation and AI really transforming your threat intelligence workflows? And where do you find that you still see that there's still no substitute for having a human in the loop when it comes to processing threat intelligence?
I'll get started. Again, the data problem. When we use AI, it's always going to be a data problem to start. And then it quickly traverses into a processing problem. But what it's doing is taking these mountains of data where you used to have to write these queries against this and sit there and kind of shake your head and go, is that plus or minus? Well, now that's an area under the curve, and it happens almost dynamically, and it has to. So then you traverse into, well, what does that become? That becomes things that you can feed in if we have standards like we talked about in the last panel. And so those become objects. And I think it's funny that when I talk about it as a software engineer, if I change my hat a little bit, we have this. We have, we basically have containerization. We have ways of taking data and moving it in ways that are efficient, that are composable. And yet we think we're not there yet on the threat intelligence side. And yet it's really the mechanically very, very similar problem. And then the final part is, how do you actually match that up? And where does the human become? Again, we call it co-pilot for a reason. Folks who've seen me speak before say, well, who's the person in the left seat? That has to be you, the pilot. So when decisions are made that impact the material aspect of an organization, or they impact life, or they impact things that in the commercial world, they impact shareholder value, you have to have someone in that loop, even if they are just writing pre-approved actions. That's okay too. If they're honing the model and they're honing the mission outcome, that's what we're there for. We're there to pilot. We need that co-pilot because we can't do everything ourselves.
Yeah, from the AI side, right, there was, I attended another event, and someone came up and says, treat AI almost as if it's your virtual assistant, but you still make the final decisions and you make those risk-based decisions, right? So that's the way we see it from our team, right? The team has done pretty good in terms of embracing AI and not staying away from it from the defensive side, and also from the automation and enablement perspective, right? And that we have starting to see some results of some proof of concepts that we got going on, where how fast the team is able to just gather the data, right, and correlate all this data, right, where it could take days sometimes just to kind of get there. And then, but again, we do have that human element in the loop as well to make sure that we are making the right decision or the right recommendation, right? And then eventually, as our virtual assistant is more trainable and it's trained better, right, then we may look into making some brisk decisions on whether or not maybe some low-hanging fruit where an AI model can just take some action on that. But again, we have to be very careful on what that looks like and what is the impact to that decision.
Great. Gentlemen, fantastic conversation. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.